The envelope with the wax seal lay on the table between Ethan Jenkins and his younger sister like a poisonous serpent, and when he finally broke it open with trembling fingers, the words inside confirmed his worst nightmare. His father's gambling debts had come due, and the collector was an orc warlord named Grath, who demanded either 10,000 gold crowns or a bride from the Jenkins family within 30 days. Ethan's father had died 3 months ago, falling from his horse in a drunken stupor, leaving behind nothing but this crumbling farmhouse on the edge of the frontier and debts that stretched across 3 territories. Ethan had known about the money owed to merchants and the local grain mill, but this was something else entirely. The letter explained that his father had lost spectacularly in a high-stakes card game in a border town called Crosspoint, where humans and orcs traded uneasily under neutral banners. The orc who had won the game was apparently some kind of minor warlord with enough influence to make the debt legally binding under frontier law. 10,000 gold crowns might as well have been 10 million. The farm brought in barely enough to feed Ethan and his sister through the winter. He sat at the rough wooden table, his head in his hands, trying to understand how his father could have been so reckless, so foolish. His sister Kora, only 15 years old, stood by the fireplace with her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. "What does it mean, a bride?" she asked quietly. "It means someone has to marry into his household to settle the debt," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "It's an old custom. Instead of money, a family can offer a daughter to join the creditor's family. It's meant to create bonds between families, to ensure the debt is truly settled through alliance rather than coin." Clara's eyes went wide with terror. "But I'm too young and you're not, I know," Ethan cut her off. He could not let his little sister be sent to an orc warlord like some piece of property. The very thought made his stomach turn. But what choice did they have? If they refused, Grath had the legal right to seize everything they owned, and the frontier magistrates would support the claim. Orcs were dangerous, unpredictable, violent, or so everyone said. Ethan had never actually met one, but the stories were enough. Green-skinned raiders who swept down from the northern mountains, taking what they wanted, killing anyone who stood in their way. He spent the next 2 weeks desperately trying to find a solution. He rode to the nearest town and spoke to a lawyer, who confirmed that the debt was legitimate and that Grath had every right to collect. He tried to negotiate with the local merchants for a loan, but no one would lend such a sum to a failed farmer with nothing to offer as collateral. He even considered running, taking Kora and fleeing east to one of the big cities, but the lawyer had warned him that breaking a frontier debt was a hanging offense. On the morning of the 28th day, Ethan was in the barn trying to repair a broken wagon wheel when he heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. He looked up, expecting to see one of the neighbors, and instead found himself staring at the largest person he had ever seen. She was an orc woman, nearly 7 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle. Her skin was a deep forest green, and 2 small white tusks curved up from her lower jaw. She wore leather armor that looked travel-worn but well-maintained, and her black hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung down to the middle of her back. Her eyes were a startling amber color, sharp and intelligent as they studied him. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. His hand instinctively went to the pitchfork leaning against the wall, but he did not pick it up. Running would be pointless. She could probably catch him in 3 strides. "Ethan Jenkins?" she asked. Her voice was surprisingly low and smooth, with an accent he could not place. "Yes," he managed to say, his throat dry. "I am Kora," she said. "I have come about your father's debt to warlord Grath." Ethan felt his knees go weak. So this was it. They were here to collect 2 days early. Perhaps Grath had sent her to intimidate him to make sure he did not try to flee. He forced himself to stand straighter, to meet her eyes even though every instinct screamed at him to look away. "I do not have the money," he said. "I tried, but I cannot raise that much. I will not send my sister to your warlord. If you have come to take the farm, then take it, but leave Clara alone. She is just a child." Something flickered across Kora's face, surprise, maybe, or confusion. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those intense amber eyes. "I have not come to take anything," she said slowly. "I have come to settle the debt." "I just told you I do not have." "I know," Kora interrupted. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, Ethan noticed that she looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. "I agreed." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. "You." "What?" "I agreed to be the bride," Kora said, her voice firm now, as though she had made a decision and would not waver from it. "To settle your father's debt. That is why I am here." Ethan felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. "I do not understand. You work for Grath. Why would you?" "Grath is my uncle," Kora said. "When your father lost the card game, my uncle saw an opportunity. He knew your father had a family, knew that eventually someone would have to settle the debt. He decided that instead of gold, he would demand a bride, and then he would send me to fulfill the contract on the other side." "But that makes no sense," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Why would he do that to you? Why would you agree?" Kora's jaw tightened, and she looked away for the first time, her gaze moving to the distant tree line. "Because I had no other choice. My uncle controls my life in the clan. I have no husband, no children, no family of my own beyond him. When he decided this was how the debt would be settled, I could either agree or be cast out with nothing. At least this way I will have a home, a place to belong." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Ethan felt a strange twist of sympathy in his chest, even as his mind reeled from the absurdity of the situation. This orc woman, this stranger, had just told him she was supposed to marry him to pay off his father's debt. It was insane. It was impossible. "I cannot marry you," he said. "I do not even know you." "The contract does not require you to know me," Kora said, turning back to face him. Her expression was carefully neutral now, guarded. "It requires that the debt be settled through a bride joining your household. I am that bride. I have the contract here, signed by my uncle and witnessed by a frontier magistrate. If you refuse, the debt remains unpaid, and Grath will take everything you have." She reached into a leather satchel at her side and pulled out a rolled parchment, handing it to him. Ethan took it with shaking hands and unrolled it, scanning the formal legal language. It was all there, just as she had said. The debt. The terms. The agreement that Kora, niece of warlord Grath, would join the Jenkins household as a bride to satisfy the obligation in full. "This is madness," Ethan whispered. "Yes," Kora agreed quietly, "but it is the madness we have been given." Ethan looked up at her, really looked at her for the first time. She stood there in her worn leather armor, her face expressionless, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched at her sides. She was as trapped in this as he was. Maybe more so. At least he had his farm, his home. She had just told him she had nothing. "What happens if I agree?" he asked slowly. "We sign the contract in front of a magistrate," Kora said. "The debt is considered paid. I stay here as your wife, and my uncle can never demand anything more from you or your family. And if I refuse, I return to my uncle and tell him you would not honor the agreement. He will come with his warriors to seize your property. You and your sister will have nothing." It was not really a choice at all. Ethan looked down at the contract again, his mind racing. He thought of Kora, of the terror in her eyes when she had asked what the letter meant. He thought of this farm, the only home he had ever known, the place where his mother was buried in the small plot behind the house. And he thought of Kora, standing before him with her chin raised and her amber eyes carefully blank, offering herself as a solution to a problem she had not created. "If I agree," he said slowly, "you would live here on this farm." "Yes, and you would be my wife." "In name," Kora said carefully. "The contract requires the bond of marriage, but it does not specify what that marriage must include. We can decide those details ourselves." Ethan felt heat rise in his face at the implication. He had never even courted a girl properly, and now he was discussing marriage terms with an orc woman he had met 5 minutes ago. "I would not force you into anything," he said quickly. "I am not that kind of man." Something softened in Kora's expression, just for a moment. "I believe you," she said quietly. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. Finally, Ethan rolled up the contract and tucked it into his belt. "I need to think," he said. "Can you give me a day?" Kora nodded. "I will make camp at the edge of your property. If you decide to go through with this, come find me tomorrow before sunset. If you do not come, I will know your answer and I will return to my uncle." She turned to leave, but Ethan found himself calling out, "Wait." Kora paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "Have you eaten today?" Ethan asked. He did not know why he was asking, except that she had traveled all this way and was about to camp alone in the woods, and something about that felt wrong. "I have provisions," Kora said. "That is not what I asked." Their eyes met, and Ethan saw surprise flicker across her face again. After a moment, she shook her head. "There is stew left from yesterday," Ethan said. "It is not much, but you are welcome to share it. You came all this way. The least I can do is offer you a meal." Kora hesitated, clearly uncertain. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you." Ethan led her to the farmhouse, acutely aware of how small and shabby it must seem to her. The roof needed repair in 2 places, and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, Kora was sitting at the table mending a shirt, and she let out a small gasp when Kora ducked through the doorway behind Ethan. "Kora, this is Kora," Ethan said quickly, trying to keep his voice calm. She is here about Father's debt." Kora stared up at Kora with wide eyes, the needle frozen in her hand. Kora looked down at the girl and then, very deliberately, took a step backward, giving her more space. "I mean you no harm," Kora said gently. "I know I look frightening, but I promise I will not hurt you or your brother." "You are very tall," Kora said in a small voice. "I am," Kora agreed. "My mother was even taller." Ethan busied himself with ladling the stew into bowls, grateful for something to do with his hands. He set one bowl in front of Kora and gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself carefully onto the bench, which creaked under her weight but held. Kora watched with fascination as Kora picked up the spoon. It looked tiny in her large hand and took a cautious sip of the stew. "It is good," Kora said, and she sounded genuinely surprised. "Ethan is a good cook," Kora offered, some of her fear seeming to ease. "Better than I am." "Our mother taught me," Ethan said, sitting down across from Kora. "She said a man should know how to feed himself and anyone depending on him." They ate in awkward silence for a while. Ethan kept sneaking glances at Kora, trying to reconcile the terrifying stories he had heard about orcs with the woman sitting at his table, quietly eating stew and being careful not to make any sudden movements that might scare Kora. "Can I ask you something?" Kora said suddenly. Kora looked up. "Yes." "Why are your tusks so small? I thought orcs had big tusks." "Kora," Ethan said sharply, mortified, but Kora actually smiled, a slight curve of her lips that softened her whole face. "It is all right. Female orcs have smaller tusks than males. They get larger as we age. Mine will probably grow a bit more, but they will never be as large as my uncle's." "Oh," Kora said. Then, with the fearless curiosity of youth, "Can I touch one?" Ethan was about to intervene again, but Kora simply leaned forward slightly and turned her head to the side. Kora reached out one tentative finger and brushed it against the smooth white tusk that curved from Kora's lower jaw. "It is like bone," Kora said wonderingly. "It is bone," Kora confirmed. "It grows from my jaw like your teeth." Kora sat back, apparently satisfied. The tension in the room had eased considerably, and they finished the meal in more comfortable silence. After, Kora insisted on helping clean the bowls, and Ethan found himself standing next to her at the wash basin, acutely aware of how much taller she was, how her presence seemed to fill the small kitchen. "Thank you for the meal," Kora said as she prepared to leave. "And for letting me explain the situation properly." "I will give you my answer tomorrow," Ethan promised. Kora nodded and left, ducking through the doorway and disappearing into the twilight. Ethan stood on the porch, watching her tall figure walk toward the tree line at the edge of his property. Kora came to stand beside him. "Are you going to marry her?" she asked quietly. "I do not know," Ethan admitted. "What do you think?" Kora was quiet for a long moment. "She does not seem mean," she finally said, "and she has sad eyes. I think maybe she does not want to be here any more than we want her to be here." Ethan looked down at his sister, surprised by her perception. "You are very wise for 15. Mother used to say that sadness recognizes sadness," Kora said. "Kora is sad, but I do not think she is bad." That night, Ethan barely slept. He lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling and turning the problem over and over in his mind. Every option seemed impossible. He could refuse Kora's offer and lose everything, leaving Kora with no home and no future. He could accept and bind himself to a stranger, an orc woman, in a marriage that would make them both outcasts in human society. Or he could run, abandon the farm and his mother's grave and spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. None of them were good choices. But as dawn broke and pale light filtered through his window, Ethan realized that one choice was at least honorable. Kora had not asked to be part of this any more than he had. She was offering him a way to protect Kora and keep the farm. The least he could do was meet her halfway. He found her at midday, camped in a small clearing just beyond his property line. She had built a neat fire and was sitting beside it, sharpening a long knife with smooth, practiced strokes. She looked up as he approached, and he saw hope flash across her face before she carefully controlled her expression. "I will do it," Ethan said without preamble. "I will sign the contract and marry you." Kora stood slowly, sliding the knife into its sheath. "You are certain?" "No," Ethan said honestly. "But it is the right thing to do for Kora, for the farm, and I think maybe for you too." Kora looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something raw and vulnerable in her amber eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know this is not what you wanted." "It is not what either of us wanted," Ethan said. "But maybe we can make it work anyway." They rode to the nearest frontier post the next morning, a small trading settlement called Millstone that served as neutral ground between human and orc territories. The magistrate there, a grizzled old man named Thomas Wells, looked over the contract with sharp eyes and then looked at Ethan and Kora with even sharper ones. "You understand what you are agreeing to, boy?" he asked Ethan. "Yes, sir." "And you, girl?" "I understand," Kora said firmly. "This is binding under frontier law," Wells said. "Once you sign, the debt is paid and you two are married. No going back on it without both of you agreeing to dissolve the union, and that requires another magistrate and fees you probably cannot afford." "We understand," Ethan and Kora said in unison. Wells grunted and produced a pen and inkwell. Sign here, then. Ethan signed first, his hand only shaking a little. Then Kora took the pen, and he noticed that she wrote her name in a clear, educated hand, something else that did not match the stories about savage orcs. Wells witnessed the signatures, pressed his seal into the wax, and then looked up at them with something that might have been sympathy. "You are married now," he said. "May you find whatever it is you are looking for." The ride back to the farm was quiet. Ethan kept stealing glances at Kora, trying to process the fact that this woman was now his wife. She rode her massive horse with easy confidence, her eyes scanning the landscape around them with the practiced awareness of someone used to watching for threats. When they reached the farm, Clara came running out to meet them. She stopped short when she saw Kora, and Ethan dismounted quickly. "It is done," he told his sister. "Kora is going to stay with us now. The debt is paid." Clara looked from Ethan to Kora and back again. Then she walked up to Kora's horse and looked up at the orc woman. "Are you going to be my sister now?" she asked. Kora blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "I suppose I am, yes." "Good," Clara said. "I always wanted a sister. Brothers are all right, but they do not know anything about braiding hair." Despite everything, Ethan saw Kora smile, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "I would be happy to braid your hair," she said. The first few days were strange and awkward. Ethan cleared out the small storage room off the kitchen and turned it into a bedroom for Kora, insisting she should have her own space. She accepted with quiet gratitude and moved her few belongings in. She had not brought much: some clothes, her weapons, a few personal items. It made Ethan realize how little she had been allowed to call her own. They fell into an uneasy routine. Ethan worked the farm, and Kora asked if she could help. He agreed, half expecting her to give up after a few hours of hard labor, but she proved to be tireless. She could lift loads that would have taken him 2 trips, and she learned quickly. When he showed her how to repair the fence, she watched carefully and then did it better than he could have. When the plow horse threw a shoe, she held the massive animal steady with one hand while he worked, the horse calming under her surprisingly gentle touch. Clara warmed to Kora quickly. The orc woman seemed to have endless patience for the girl's questions, and was happy to teach her things: how to skin a rabbit, how to track deer, how to braid hair in the complex patterns that orc women used. Ethan often came in from the fields to find the two of them sitting together, talking and laughing like they had known each other for years. But with Ethan, Kora remained careful and distant. She was polite, helpful, and respectful, but there was always a wall between them. She never stood too close, never let their hands touch, never met his eyes for longer than necessary. It was like living with a particularly well-mannered ghost. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ethan was working on the barn roof when he heard shouting from the road. He climbed down quickly and found Clara standing near the fence, facing 3 men on horseback. Ethan did not recognize them, but he recognized the type: rough frontier men, probably trappers or hired swords, with hard eyes and weapons on their belts. "What is going on?" Ethan asked, moving to stand beside his sister. The lead man, a stocky fellow with a scarred face, grinned unpleasantly. "Just heard an interesting rumor in town. Someone said Ethan Jenkins married an orc to get out of his father's debts. Wanted to see if it was true." "I do not see how that is your business," Ethan said carefully. "It is everyone's business when a human betrays his own kind," the man said. "Orcs are monsters. They killed my brother in a raid 5 years ago, and here you are, taking one into your bed like some kind of orc lover." "You need to leave," Ethan said, his hand moving to the axe at his belt. "Or what?" the scarred man laughed. "You will set your orc whore on us. Ethan's vision went red and he started forward, but a large hand on his shoulder stopped him. He looked up to find Kora standing beside him. She must have come from the back of the house, drawn by the shouting. Her face was completely expressionless, but Ethan could see the tension in every line of her body. "You should listen to him," Kora said quietly. "Leave now." The scarred man's grin widened. "There she is, the orc bride. You know what we do to greenskins in this territory, monster." "I know what you try to do," Kora said. Her hand had not moved toward her weapons, but there was something in her voice that made the horses shift nervously. "I also know that you are 3 men who think you are brave because you have swords and I am a woman alone. But I was killing raiders on the northern frontier while you were still learning to walk. If you draw those weapons, I will put you in the ground, all 3 of you." The men exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. The scarred man's grin faltered. "That is a threat," he said, but his voice had lost some of its bravado. "No," Kora said. "A threat implies uncertainty. I am telling you exactly what will happen. Leave now or I will defend my family. My family." The words hung in the air. Ethan saw Clara move closer to Kora, and he realized he had done the same, the 3 of them standing together against the men on horseback. The scarred man spat on the ground. "This is not over," he said. "People need to know what you are. What you have brought into this territory." He wheeled his horse around and the 3 of them rode off, kicking up dust. Ethan watched them go, his heart pounding. When they were out of sight, he turned to Kora. "Thank you," he said. Kora looked down at him, and for the first time he saw real emotion break through her careful control: anger, fear, and something that looked like shame. "I am sorry," she said. "I have brought this on you. People will talk. They will make your life difficult because of me." "Those men were looking for trouble," Ethan said firmly. "That is not your fault." "It is, though," Kora said. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "I am an orc. You are human. The world does not want us to exist together. I should have known this would happen." "Then what would you have done differently?" Ethan demanded. "Let my family lose everything. Let yourself be cast out with nothing." "Maybe it would have been better," Kora said quietly. "No," Clara said suddenly, her voice fierce. "It would not have been better. I am glad you are here, Kora. I do not care what those horrible men say." Kora looked down at Clara, and Ethan saw her eyes shine with unshed tears. "You are a sweet child," she said softly. "And you are my sister," Clara said stubbornly. "That is all that matters." That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Ethan found Kora sitting outside on the porch, staring up at the stars. He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "This is not your fault. Those men chose to come here and cause trouble." "They will come back," Kora said. "Or others like them will. I am a target, Ethan. And now, because you are married to me, so are you and Clara." "Then we will deal with it," Ethan said. "Together." Kora turned to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "Why would I not be?" "Because I am an orc," Kora said, as if it should be obvious. "Because I have forced myself into your life, into your home. Because everywhere I go, people look at me like I am a monster." "You have not forced anything," Ethan said. "You offered a solution to an impossible problem, and as for the rest of it..." He paused, trying to find the right words. "You are not what I expected. When you first showed up, I was terrified. All I could think about were the stories: orcs raiding villages, killing people, taking slaves. But you are not any of those things. You are patient with Clara. You work hard. You have been nothing but respectful and helpful since you arrived. I do not see a monster when I look at you, Kora. I see someone who got dealt a bad hand and is doing her best with it, just like me." Kora was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. No one has ever said anything like that to me before. Then people are fools, Ethan said simply. She turned away, but not before he saw a tear slide down her green cheek. They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. More comfortable, more honest. The trouble came 2 weeks later. Ethan was in town buying supplies when he overheard a group of men talking in the general store. They were planning something, he realized with growing dread. Planning to deal with the orc problem on the Jenkins farm. He abandoned his shopping and rode home as fast as his horse could carry him. He found Kora in the barn, mucking out the stalls. "We need to talk," he said urgently. She set down her pitchfork immediately, reading the alarm in his voice. "What happened?" He told her what he had heard. Kora's expression grew darker with every word. "How many men?" she asked. "I counted at least 6 voices, maybe more." Kora nodded slowly. "When?" "Tonight, probably." They were talking about waiting until after dark. "Then you and Clara need to leave," Kora said. "Go to town, stay with someone you trust. I will deal with this." "Absolutely not," Ethan said. "This is my home and you are my wife. I am not running." "Ethan, these men are coming to kill me," Kora said bluntly. "I can handle myself, but not if I have to worry about protecting you and Clara too." "Then we protect each other," Ethan said. "I am not a warrior, but I can use a bow, and I will not let you face this alone." They argued for another 10 minutes, but Ethan would not be moved. Finally, Kora agreed, but only on the condition that Clara be sent to stay with the neighbors, an elderly couple named the Martins who lived a few miles down the road. Clara protested fiercely, but Ethan was firm, and eventually Kora took the girl on horseback and delivered her personally, making the Martins promise to keep her safe until someone came to get her. When Kora returned, the sun was setting. She and Ethan worked quickly, barricading the doors and windows of the farmhouse, preparing weapons, setting up sightlines. Kora moved with calm efficiency, and Ethan realized she had done this before, prepared for an attack, fortified a position. It should have been frightening, but instead it was oddly reassuring. She knew what she was doing. "If this goes badly," Kora said as they worked, "I want you to run. Do not try to be a hero, just get out and get to safety." "The same goes for you," Ethan said. Kora smiled grimly. "I am harder to kill than you think." They came an hour after full dark. Ethan saw the torches first, moving through the trees toward the farm. He counted 8 men, maybe 9. His mouth went dry. "Remember," Kora said quietly, crouching beside him near the window. "Do not shoot unless you have a clear target. Make every arrow count." The men emerged from the tree line and spread out, surrounding the house. The scarred man from before was there, and he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Jenkins, send out the orc and we will let you and your sister live. This does not have to involve you." "Go to hell," Ethan shouted back. "Your funeral, orc lover." The first arrow came through the window a second later, shattering the glass. Ethan ducked instinctively, and Kora moved in a blur, her own bow coming up. She loosed an arrow, and Ethan heard a scream from outside. One down. The attack came in earnest then. Arrows and rocks smashed against the house, and someone tried to break down the front door. Kora moved from window to window, firing with devastating accuracy. Ethan did his best, managing to wound one man who got too close to the barn. The noise was deafening, and smoke began to fill the room. They had set fire to something outside. "The barn," Kora said grimly. "They are trying to burn us out." Ethan felt a surge of desperation. Everything they owned was here. If the barn burned, the animals would die, and they would lose all their winter supplies. "I have to stop them," he said, starting toward the door. Kora grabbed his arm. "That is what they want. They are trying to draw us out. I cannot let them burn everything." Kora held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Stay behind me." She threw open the door and charged out into the night with a roar that made Ethan's blood run cold. It was a sound of pure fury, of violence unleashed, and the men attacking them clearly had not expected it. Kora had dropped her bow and drawn 2 long knives, and she moved like a force of nature, fast and brutal. She took down the first man before he could even raise his sword. The second tried to run, and she threw a knife that caught him in the leg. Ethan ran for the barn, his own knife in hand. He reached the door and threw it open, releasing the animals inside before the fire could spread. The horses bolted out into the night, and the cow followed, bellowing in fear. He grabbed a bucket and started trying to put out the flames that were licking up the side of the barn. A hand grabbed him from behind and spun him around. It was the scarred man, and he had a knife at Ethan's throat before he could react. "Should have taken my offer," the man hissed. Then the scarred man's eyes went wide, and he looked down at the knife blade protruding from his chest. He fell, and Kora was standing behind him, her face spattered with blood, her eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, grabbing Ethan by the shoulders. "No, I am fine." She pulled him into a crushing hug, and Ethan felt her shaking. "Do not ever do that again," she said into his hair. "Do not ever risk yourself like that." They stood like that for a moment, and then Kora pulled back, looking around. The surviving attackers had fled, leaving 3 dead and 2 wounded. The fire on the barn was small enough that Ethan was able to put it out with Kora's help, and miraculously, the damage was not too severe. They spent the rest of the night rounding up the animals and checking the wounded attackers. Kora bound their injuries with rough efficiency, and then sent them running with a warning that if they or anyone else came back, there would be no mercy. When dawn finally broke, Ethan and Kora stood in the farmyard, exhausted and filthy. The house was damaged but standing. The barn would need repairs but was intact. They had survived. "We need to go get Clara," Ethan said. Kora nodded. They rode to the Martin farm together, and Clara came running out before they had even dismounted, throwing herself at both of them. "I heard fighting," she sobbed. "I thought you were dead." "We are all right," Ethan said, holding her tight. "We are all right." But when they returned home, they found the word traitor painted on the side of the house in red paint. Someone had come while they were gone, leaving their message. Kora stared at it, her face unreadable. "I will leave," she said quietly. "This will not stop. They will keep coming, keep threatening you until I am gone." "No," Ethan said. "Ethan, no," he repeated, louder this time. "You are my wife. This is your home. I do not care what they paint on the walls or what threats they make. You are not leaving." "Why?" Kora asked, her voice breaking. "Why do you keep defending me? Why do you keep putting yourself and Clara at risk for me?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Ethan said. Then more quietly, "and because I care about you." The words hung in the air between them. Kora stared at him, her amber eyes wide. "You care about me," she repeated like she could not quite believe it. "Yes," Ethan said. "I know this started as a business arrangement, but Kora, you are not just some stranger anymore. You are part of this family. Clara loves you, and I." He took a deep breath. "I think I am starting to love you too." Kora made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You are insane." "Probably," Ethan agreed. "But I mean it." She closed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. "I love you too," Kora whispered. "I think I have loved you since you offered me stew that first day. No one has ever been kind to me like you have. No one has ever treated me like I was worth something." "You are worth everything," Ethan said fiercely. "And we are going to make this work. I do not care how hard it is." The next few weeks were difficult. Word spread about the attack, and public opinion in the area was divided. Some people thought Ethan had gotten what he deserved for marrying an orc. Others thought the attackers had gone too far and should be prosecuted. The frontier magistrate, Thomas Wells, rode out personally to take statements and seemed genuinely angry about what had happened on neutral frontier land. "This kind of vigilante nonsense is exactly what we are trying to prevent," he told Ethan and Kora. "I will make sure the men who did this are held accountable." True to his word, Wells tracked down the surviving attackers and brought them before a frontier court. 2 were hanged for murder, and the others were sentenced to hard labor. It did not make everyone happy, but it sent a message. The law applied to everyone, and frontier marriages were legal and binding, even between humans and orcs. In the midst of all this, Ethan and Kora's relationship deepened. They began sharing meals together, really talking for the first time. Kora told him about growing up in her uncle's clan, how she had always been different, more interested in learning to read and write than in raiding and fighting. How her uncle had seen her as a tool to be used, not a person to be valued. Ethan told her about his parents, about how his mother had died when he was 16, and his father had fallen apart afterward, drinking and gambling until there was nothing left but debt and shame. How he had been trying to hold everything together for Clara, to give her some kind of normal childhood despite everything. They worked the farm together, and Ethan found himself relying on Kora more and more. She was stronger than him, but she never made him feel weak. She was smarter than him about many things, but she always asked his opinion and listened when he spoke. They were becoming partners in every sense of the word. One evening, about 2 months after the attack, Ethan came in from the fields to find Kora and Clara in the kitchen, teaching Clara how to make orc-style flatbread. The 2 of them were laughing, flour dusting their hands, and something in Ethan's chest tightened with love so fierce it hurt. "That smells amazing," he said, coming to wash his hands. "Kora says in her clan everyone learns to make this," Clara said excitedly. "Even the warriors." "Especially the warriors," Kora corrected with a smile. "You cannot raid properly on an empty stomach." Ethan laughed, and Kora met his eyes over Clara's head. There was such warmth in her gaze, such open affection that it took his breath away. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Kora came to find Ethan on the porch. She sat down beside him, closer than she used to, their shoulders almost touching. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what? About us. About this marriage." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "When we first did this, it was just to settle a debt. But it has become something more, has it not?" "Yes," Ethan said. "It has." "Then I want to do it again," Kora said. "Properly this time, not because of debt or obligation, but because we choose it, because we love each other." Ethan felt his heart swell. "Like a vow renewal." "Like a real wedding," Kora said. "The first time was legal, but it was not real, not in our hearts. I want to stand before you and promise myself to you because I want to, not because I have to." "I would like that," Ethan said softly. "I would like that very much." They planned the ceremony for the following month, in the small clearing where Kora had first camped when she arrived. They invited the neighbors who had been kind to them, the Martins, a few of the other farmers who had not turned against them. Thomas Wells agreed to officiate again, and he seemed genuinely pleased to do so. "This is what the frontier is supposed to be about," he told them. "Building something new, something better than all the old hatreds and prejudices." The day of the ceremony was bright and clear, the autumn air crisp and cool. Clara had woven flowers into Kora's black braid, and Kora wore a simple green dress that brought out the color of her skin. She looked beautiful and terrifying and perfect. Ethan wore his best shirt, the one his mother had made for him years ago, and he felt his hands shaking as he stood before Kora and took her hands in his. "I never expected this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never expected to find someone like you, to love someone the way I love you. You came into my life because of my father's debt, but you stayed because of who you are. You are strong and kind and brave, and I promise to stand beside you for the rest of my life, no matter what comes." Kora was crying openly now, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "I never thought anyone would want me," she said. "I thought I would spend my whole life being used by my uncle, being seen as a monster. But you saw me. You saw who I really was, and you loved me anyway. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to hope. I promise to love you and protect you and build a life with you that we can both be proud of." They exchanged simple rings that Ethan had made from silver wire, and when Wells pronounced them married, Ethan kissed Kora in front of everyone, and he did not care who saw or what they thought. This was his wife, his partner, his love, and he was done hiding it. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. The Martins brought fresh bread, and another neighbor brought a roasted pig. They ate and drank and laughed, and for the first time since his father's death, Ethan felt truly happy. As the sun set and people began to leave, Clara hugged both Ethan and Kora tight. "I am glad you two found each other," she said, "even if it started out weird." "Me too," Kora said, ruffling Clara's hair. "Me too." That night, Ethan and Kora moved her belongings from the small storage room into his bedroom. It felt like a momentous step, making their marriage real in every way. They lay together in the darkness, Kora's head on Ethan's chest, his arms around her. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked softly. "Happier than I have ever been," Kora said. "Are you?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I know there will be more challenges. I know not everyone will accept us, but as long as we have each other, I think we can handle anything." "I think so too," Kora said. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Ethan dreamed of the future they would build together. The seasons turned. Winter came, and the three of them worked together to keep the farm running through the cold months. Kora proved invaluable, her strength allowing them to accomplish tasks that would have been impossible otherwise. She hunted when game was scarce, bringing down deer and wild boar that fed them through the lean times. Spring brought new challenges. A late frost threatened their newly planted crops, and they spent 2 frantic days covering everything they could, trying to save what they had worked so hard to plant. Kora worked tirelessly, her hands growing numb with cold, but she never complained. When they finally finished, Ethan found her sitting in the barn, her shoulders shaking with exhaustion. "We did everything we could," he said, sitting beside her and putting an arm around her. "I know," Kora said. "I just want this to work. I want to prove that we can make a life here, that we can succeed." "We already have," Ethan said gently. "Look at what we have built. The farm is stronger than it was when my father was alive. Clara is thriving. We are happy. That is success, Kora. The rest is just details." She leaned against him, and he felt her relax slightly. "You always know what to say." "Not always," Ethan said with a small laugh. "But I try." The crops survived the frost, and by summer they had a harvest better than any the farm had produced in years. Word spread, and some of the neighbors who had been hostile began to soften. It was hard to maintain prejudice when the evidence of success was right in front of them. One hot July day, a young orc man appeared at the farm. He was smaller than Kora, but still impressively built, with darker green skin and larger tusks. He approached cautiously, his hands visible and empty. "I am looking for Kora," he said. "I was told she lives here." Kora came out of the house, her expression wary. "I am Kora. Who are you?" "My name is Thrak," the young orc said. "I am your uncle's son, your cousin." Kora's face went hard. "What do you want?" "I came to warn you," Thrak said. "My father is dead. He died in a raid 3 months ago, but before he died, he told me what he did to you. How he forced you into this marriage to settle a debt." He looked at Ethan, then back at Kora. "I came to tell you that you are free. The contract is void now that he is dead. You can come home if you want." Kora was very still. Ethan felt his heart sink. He had never considered this possibility, that she might have the option to leave to go back to her people. "Home," Kora said slowly. "You think the clan is my home. You are an orc," Thrak said, sounding confused. "Where else would you belong?" "Here," Kora said firmly. She reached out and took Ethan's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "This is my home. This farm, this man, his sister. This is where I belong." Thrak looked stunned. "But they are human. You are living among humans, working like a farmer. You are a warrior, Kora. You were trained by the best fighters in the clan." "I was also beaten and used and treated like property," Kora said, her voice hard. "Here I am valued. I am loved. I have a family who wants me, not for what I can do for them, but for who I am. I am not giving that up." Thrak was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand. My father was not a good man. I am trying to lead the clan differently now." He paused. "If you ever change your mind, you would be welcome. As my kin, not as property." "Thank you," Kora said, her voice softening slightly. "I appreciate that, but my answer will not change." Thrak left, and Kora stood watching him go, still holding Ethan's hand. When the orc was out of sight, she turned to Ethan. "Did you think I would leave?" she asked. "I was afraid you might," Ethan admitted. "You could have a life with your own people, not have to face prejudice and threats." "I could have a life without you," Kora said. "That is not a life I want. You are my people now, Ethan. You and Clara. I chose you, remember?" Ethan pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I love you." "I love you too," Kora said against his shoulder. "Always." Summer turned to autumn, and Clara turned 16. She had grown tall and confident, no longer the frightened girl who had stood in the kitchen that first day when Kora arrived. She helped run the farm now, and she talked about maybe opening a shop in town someday, selling the crafts and preserves they made. "You would be good at that," Kora told her one evening as they worked on preserving the summer vegetables. "You have a gift for talking to people, making them comfortable." "I learned from you," Clara said with a smile. "You taught me that being different does not mean being less." Kora looked touched, and Ethan felt his heart swell with pride for both of them. In October, Kora came to Ethan with news that made them both cry with joy. She was pregnant. They had not been trying particularly hard, but they had not been preventing it either, and the thought of a child, a symbol of everything they had built together, was overwhelming. "Are you happy?" Kora asked, her hand on her still flat stomach. "I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I can say," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "We are going to be parents. Our child will be half human, half orc," Kora said softly. "They will face challenges we cannot even imagine." "They will also have us," Ethan said firmly. "And Clara, and this farm, and all the love we can give them. They will be strong and kind and brave just like their mother. And stubborn and loyal and good just like their father," Kora said with a smile. The pregnancy was not easy. Kora was sick for the first few months, and she struggled with being unable to work as hard as she was used to. Ethan and Clara did their best to pick up the slack, and the neighbors who had become friends pitched in as well. The Martins brought food, and another family helped with the harvest. In late spring, as the apple trees were blooming, Kora went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan feared they would lose her. But she was as strong as ever, and when the midwife finally placed a squalling infant in Ethan's arms, he wept with relief and joy. Their daughter had Kora's green skin, but it was lighter, more olive than forest green. She had tiny tusks, barely visible, and pointed ears. Her eyes, when she finally opened them, were a mix of Kora's amber and Ethan's blue, a striking hazel that seemed to shift in the light. She was perfect. "What should we name her?" Kora asked, exhausted but smiling as she held their daughter. "How about Hope?" Ethan suggested. "Because that is what she represents, hope for a better future." "Hope," Kora repeated, testing the name. "Hope Jenkins, I like it." Clara was immediately smitten with her niece, hovering over the baby and insisting on helping with everything. Kora tolerated it with good humor, and Ethan watched his family with a heart so full he thought it might burst. As Hope grew, it became clear that she had inherited the best of both parents. She was strong like Kora, but quick and clever like Ethan. She had her mother's direct way of speaking and her father's kindness. The neighbors who came to visit were charmed by her, and some of the people who had been hostile to Kora and Ethan's marriage found their prejudices softening in the face of a smiling toddler. When Hope was 2 years old, Thomas Wells rode out to the farm with an unusual request. The Frontier Council was looking for examples of successful human-orc cooperation to present to the larger territorial government. They wanted to know if Ethan and Kora would be willing to tell their story. "I know it is asking a lot," Wells said. "You would have to travel to the territorial capital and speak in front of officials and lawmakers. But I think your story could make a real difference. It could help change laws, make it easier for others like you." Ethan and Kora discussed it at length. It would mean leaving the farm for several weeks, and it would put them in the public eye in a way that could be dangerous. But in the end, they agreed. If their story could help even one other couple avoid the challenges they had faced, it would be worth it. They traveled to the capital with Hope and Clara, and Ethan was struck by how different it was from the frontier. The streets were paved, the buildings tall and imposing. People stared at Kora and whispered, but she walked with her head high, holding Hope on her hip and refusing to be cowed. The hearing was intimidating. They stood before a panel of stern-faced officials and told their story: the debt, the forced marriage, the choice to make it real, the attacks they had survived, the life they had built. Kora spoke about what it was like to be seen as a monster, to be forced into a situation not of her choosing, and to find love anyway. Ethan spoke about learning to see past his own prejudices, about choosing to build something new rather than clinging to old hatreds. When they finished, there was a long silence. Then one of the officials, an older woman with silver hair, spoke. "What you have accomplished is remarkable," she said. "Not just the marriage itself, but the farm, the community you have built, the child you are raising. You have proven that cooperation between humans and orcs is not only possible but beneficial. We will be recommending changes to frontier law to protect mixed marriages and their offspring. Thank you for your courage in coming here and sharing your story." The changes took time to implement, but they did come. Laws were passed protecting the rights of mixed-species couples and their children. Prejudice did not disappear overnight, but it became harder to justify legally, and that was a start. Ethan and Kora returned to their farm, to the life they had built. They had more children: a son with Ethan's dark hair and Kora's strength, another daughter with Kora's pointed ears and Ethan's gentle smile. Clara eventually did open her shop in town, selling preserves and crafts, and she became known for her fair dealing and her warm welcome to everyone. Regardless of species, the farm prospered. The barn that had nearly burned was rebuilt stronger than before. The fields that had struggled under Ethan's father produced abundant harvests under Ethan and Kora's care. They hired help as they could afford it, and they made sure to pay fairly and treat everyone with respect, regardless of whether they were human, orc, or any of the other species that called the frontier home. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan and Kora stood in the same clearing where they had renewed their vows, watching their children play. Hope was 8 now, chasing her younger siblings through the grass, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked, slipping his arm around Kora's waist. "Agreeing to come here to marry me?" Kora leaned her head against his shoulder. "Never," she said. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted: a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You saw me when everyone else just saw a monster." "You were never a monster," Ethan said softly. "You were always just Kora, and Kora is everything I need." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children and thinking about the future they would continue to build. It would not always be easy. There would still be people who disapproved, who saw their family as wrong or unnatural, but they had faced worse and survived. Together, they were strong enough to handle anything. As the sun set and the children ran to them, tired and happy, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. His father's debt had seemed like a curse, but it had brought him the greatest blessing of his life. It had brought him Kora. That night, with the children asleep and the farm quiet around them, Ethan and Kora lay in bed, wrapped around each other as they had been on their wedding night. "I love you," Ethan whispered. "I love you too," Kora whispered back. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for choosing me," Ethan said. "Thank you for walking into that barn and saying you knew you agreed. Thank you for being brave enough to give us a chance." Kora kissed him softly. "It was the best decision I ever made." Outside, the frontier night was alive with sounds: crickets chirping, an owl hooting, the distant howl of a wolf. But inside the farmhouse, there was only peace and love and the quiet contentment of two people who had found their place in the world together. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Hope grew into a strong, confident young woman who moved between the human and orc communities with ease, serving as a bridge between the two cultures. Their son became a skilled farmer and craftsman, beloved for his patience and his ability to fix almost anything. Their youngest daughter showed a talent for healing and went to study with a traveling doctor, learning to help anyone who needed it, regardless of species. Clara married a kind man from town, a merchant who had no prejudice against orcs and who treated Kora with the respect of a beloved sister. She and her husband often visited the farm with their own children, and the house would be filled with laughter and love. Ethan and Kora grew older together, their hair going gray, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experience and mutual respect. On a warm summer evening, when Ethan was 60 and Kora 58, they sat on the porch they had sat on so many times before. Their children were grown and gone, building lives of their own, but they visited often, bringing grandchildren who climbed on Kora's lap and begged for stories. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" Ethan asked, taking Kora's hand. "You asked me why I was being kind to you," Kora said with a smile, "as if kindness needed a reason." "You have taught me so much," Ethan said. "About courage, about strength, about what it means to truly love someone." "And you taught me about gentleness," Kora said. "About patience and acceptance. About what it feels like to be seen and valued for who you are, not what you can do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the fields they had worked together for so many years. The farm would pass to their children eventually, but for now it was still theirs, their home, their legacy. "I would do it all again," Kora said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every fight, every challenge. I would do it all again for this. For you." "So would I," Ethan said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Every single moment." As the stars began to appear overhead, they went inside together, to the home they had built with their own hands and their own love. A home that had started as a desperate solution to an impossible debt and had become a symbol of hope, of courage, of the power of choosing love over fear. They had proven that two people from different worlds could build a life together. That prejudice could be overcome. That love, real love, was stronger than any debt, any hatred, any obstacle. And as they fell asleep that night, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for nearly 40 years, they knew that their story would continue through their children and their children's children. A legacy not of debt or obligation, but of choice and love and the courage to build something new. The debt had been paid long ago, but the love it had brought them would last forever.